Welcome in to another edition of the Zoneheads podcast, broadcasting live on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Brandon. He's Zach. The NFL playoffs are rolling right along. The college football playoff final is set, and Paolo Banchero making his triumphant return in front of the Magic faithful. Zach, a wonderful weekend across the board. That is, unless, of course, you're a Bucs fan, of which you are one of them, and an uncharacteristic mistake by Baker Mayfield, some shoddy defense down the stretch. So how you feeling on this Monday morning quarterback edition of the Zoneheads podcast?
Yeah, not great. I mean, this time of year, Brandon, like you have to not do those types of things to win ball games. So, obviously, and I've said this not just my entire career, but my entire fandom of sports, staying up late for a loss just hurts. Like if you're up late, especially as we get older, if you're up late, your team wins, maybe you make some cheddar, hopefully both. You're like, I can sleep like a baby. I'm going to wake up fresh. If it's the opposite though, and you lose money and or your team loses, in my case, both last night with the Bucs, it just stings more, right? Like you go to bed sour, you wake up sour. And I'm sure if it hurt for me, it hurt for Baker Mayfield and those players as well this morning.
Also, a shout out to John Momola, your former boss. I guess forever boss is what you're calling him now. But
man,
if you're watching this right now, this fancy graphic and what we find the boxes we find ourselves in right now, all created by John Momola. So go ahead and throw him a follow on social. He's doing some big things now that he's out of the corporate umbrella.
Yeah, but still has that skill set and all these awesome things, creativity wise. And look, creativity wise, I thought the Bucs offensively had some things working in their favor. We were all amped up about the Marshawn Lattimore, Mike Evans matchup. Well, Big Mike for the Bucs had a huge day. I mean, he was unstoppable. They were feeding him. I thought for sure it was going to be the Jalen McMillan show because I was like, that's going to be one. Like those guys get in fights. Maybe one gets tossed. They usually give and take on both sides, but it was all Mike Evans in that matchup. And there was a lot that the Bucs did well, especially in that first half on the offensive side, that made you think, okay, they should win this game. And sticking specifically to the offense right now, Liam Cohen, their OC, I think he's going to be a hot candidate this coaching cycle potentially for a job elsewhere, Brandon. But it's tough, man. Like you got to take advantage of opportunities when you have them. And I don't know. The Bucs offense, as good as you felt about them, or the vibe around them was good, but ultimately what we're going to remember isn't Mike Evans' big game. It's not Liam Cohen's creativity, Bucky Irving's rookie breakout. It's going to be the Baker Mayfield fumble that led to 7 for Washington. A team, by the way, on the other side in the Commanders that with Dan Quinn continuously went for it and did not get it and kept leaving points on the board. And you just felt like that was going to bite them. And I think it would have, but Baker and that fumble in the Bucs, they just gave it all away in that instance.
Yeah, and I think this game, as many in the NFL, come down to quarterback play. I thought the game would be close. I thought the odds makers had it about right. Bucs -3 heading into this one. But I thought the Bucs were not only going to win, but cover in a close game because it would be Baker Mayfield, not Jaden, or vice versa. It would be Jaden Daniels, not Baker Mayfield, making that late game mistake, and Todd Bowles being able to confuse and rattle a rookie quarterback late in the game. And it was the exact opposite that happened. Now, I'm not going to give any credit to the Commanders' defense for what Baker Mayfield did at the end of the game, but still over the entire quarter, we didn't see any production from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensively. So some credit has to go to Dan Quinn and the Commanders side. I just thought they were at the end of the day, that was the better coach team that day, and Jaden Daniels was the better quarterback over Baker Mayfield. He did not look like a rookie out there. He made big plays when he had to late in this game. I was in transit between the Magic game and then catching the second half, so I'll lean on you for first half analysis. But in terms of what I saw, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense just petered out at the exact wrong time, and that was the unit that carried them the entire season. So really disappointing to lose, but I think even more disappointing when you look at why they lost, and it was the reason that they were there in the first place.
Yeah, I do agree with that quite a bit. I mean, you would have thought that they would have been able to put up even more points, overcome that. But I think a big reason that they weren't able to, and that the offense maybe didn't look as good as it has throughout the course of this season, wasn't necessarily Baker's fault, given that fumble was the biggest part of the game. But like overall, I don't blame Baker or the OC or Bucky or the receivers. Even Kate Otten was healthy and showed up with a couple catches from the tight end group. The problem is that Dan Quinn came in with a better game plan and implemented better than Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles is going to blitz this rookie QB Jaden Daniels all night long. And early on in that first half, you were like, "Oh, it's going to be a big night for the blitzing Bowles defense, and they're going to get to him." The problem was for the Bucks, but not for the Commanders, is that they kept the tempo up so much. Vita Vea is a monster, an all-pro type of player right there in the front. And Kalijah Cansey was the best player on defense last night for the Bucks. Two big boys in the middle that are athletic as hell, but they couldn't catch their breath and they couldn't get to Jaden because the offense never stopped moving for Washington. And even though they stalled out a lot of those drives, most of those stalled out on fourth down at the one, right? Like 2 or 3 different times. So you got to credit Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, who could have, I think he was the best, one of the best OC hires. You talk about Liam Cohen. Cliff looked fantastic as an OC this year and still continues to do things with Jaden. But that up-tempo offense really nullified a lot of the Bucs' ability to slow down the Commanders. And even when it didn't, they went for it on fourth down, and they were really successful at converting to get the first one they needed it. So I thought the game plan, again, just implemented to the T by Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, and that Jaden Daniels offense. So a ton of credit there, because if they were more stagnant and took their time, I think Bowles' defense would have had more success, Brandon.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the fatigue portion of it. That was one thing that jumped off the screen to me at the end of the game when the Commanders were going on that game-winning drive. You saw a lot of hands on hips. You saw a lot of huffing and puffing. And with how good the Commanders are at running the ball with their quarterback and that pair of running backs, you just figured that it was a nail in the coffin kind of moment. Once they picked up that first down and you saw Austin Eckler with that tough run, I was like, this is it, because they're going to be able to do whatever they want with this clock.
It was like that all game, Brandon. Like even the first drive, the Bucs had the Washington Commanders pinned in their own territory, got him to third down, were hitting Daniels. Zion McCollum laid out Daniels in that same drive towards the end of it, and you were like, damn, the Bucs are bringing the boomstick. And they were. The problem is that with the speed and athleticism on the Commanders side on offense and the pace at which they played, the Bucs defenders couldn't catch their breath. And I thought that they were playing well, but unfortunately, this is all, and again, this is where I give credit to the Commanders. This is already a team thin, right? And then Jamel Dean goes out. Zion was out at 1.2 from the cornerback slot, and they were on CB 3, 4, 5, 6. They were already down safeties. They've brought in so many. Antoine Winfield Jr. returned this weekend for the game, but he's been out. Jordan Whitehead was in a car accident before the regular season finale. He's been out. Like, they're so thin. They were starting guys that they picked up off the Falcons practice squad at linebacker next to Levante David, who is a legend, but besides him, like, they were already thin. So then you're running these guys to exhaustion. Well, if you're already on your third, fourth, or fifth guys, Brandon, and the pace is up, and you got 6, 7, and 8 depth pieces types of players in, and Jaden Daniels is on the other side, that ain't going to end well.
Yeah, when you break it down like that, I kind of wish I had that thought process prior to the game. I'd be a much richer man today, but instead I took the L. And this is something that from the betting lean, because you and I often bounce that form of content off of one another. I did not take the Bucks straight up. I rarely play teasers these days, but I loved taking the Bucks across the zero, getting them at +3, and then attaching that to Rams +8.5 once that line had moved to 2.5. So, but 6 points for both of those games. I have not experienced this yet on Hard Rock. I have with the offshore books, and they can't wait to dick you over there. But I'm curious. Hard Rock says that this bet is still active, but I hit the +3 on the nose. So I don't know if a push is in play or what. I'm actually not certain how Hard Rock handles teasers when you actually hit the number right on the nose.
So what they do, if it's in a parlay situation, which you're basically saying it is, right, with the other game,
sort of.
It nullifies. So that doesn't count towards your bet. So whatever the odds are with that removed, if you win your next bet is what you would win. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that with the teaser, that'd be minimal. So yeah. I'm basically just looking to break even. I have a chance to break even if the Rams can cover 8.5 tonight.
Man, look, I'll tell you this, Vegas, Hard Rock, whoever you want to talk about, when it comes to the house, if you break even, they consider it a loss for them. So I guess I'll give you some credit there. We don't look at it that way, but I promise you that they do. And look, again, from the betting angle, just to kind of broaden it to the whole first round of the postseason, man, I had one of those betting weekends where I was on the precipice of like making real dough across the board.
I
Every
love it. I love
game,
being on the precipice. Great
every
place to be.
game, the entire slate, and just like by the skin of my teeth, miss so many, so many. It's the kind that hurts that makes you chase. Like losing doesn't make you chase. Losing by a couple yards or a point is the type of thing because then you feel like you're right there. You're about to start heating up. Right?
You started
You're
picturing the wins. See, this is something, this is good. Good betting psychology. You can't picture your wins. Don't start projecting what your account is going to look like. It is what it is in the moment, and then hopefully it gets better. You can't don't ever pull out that app, that calculator app, before you cash the bets.
They had a Kurt Warner ad last night, kind of, preaching about like being careful when you gamble. And one of the things was like, never chase your losses. And I was like, my brother, you've never gambled a day in your life. Like, there ain't a person I've ever met that doesn't. You meet someone who's a first time gambler, whether they lose their first bet or win like a big amount of money. Then bet the first bet that they lose, whether it's out the gate or a week after the fact, they chase it. Like it is inherently part of gambling. Now,
you got to limit that. You mentioned what the sports books want. They want you doing that. They can't wait for you to chase. That's when they really win.
Limit it in two ways. Big picture, you limit it so that you don't lose your house and everything you own. Small picture, you limit it so that you still have some bankroll to work with. You live to play another day. A chip in a chair, as we say in poker. Yeah. But that being said, listen, I got no problem with taking a late night college hoops game after, some NFL action and trying to make a little bit of cheddar back. You just, you got to be careful with it. There's smart ways to gamble. There's smart ways to chase on the tail end of some losses.
Oh, a smart way to chase. That might be its own podcast episode. I don't know if I agree with that. Chasing is almost always a bad idea.
Well, so is losing, and everybody hates to do that, and that's why we chase.
Don't worry, Bucks fans. I think if you're annoyed with the Commanders now, just wait until next weekend. The Lions should have their way with this team. This is probably a rough matchup for the Commanders.
I don't know how it's not a blowout, and that's how we felt about the Bills and Broncos, which was that. Kind of again looking at the rest of the landscape. Obviously, we'll kind of take a bigger peek at next week and kind of get into that. But I think the Commanders are going to get blown out by the Lions. I think just like we saw again, the Broncos get blown out by the Bills. And credit to Denver. I think one of the things I learned from that game, even in matchups similar to what we'll see, I think, with Washington and Detroit, is if the Commanders can do what Denver did and come out and score right away and punch the other team in the mouth, it at least keeps it somewhat interesting. You start to think, maybe this won't go the way that I think it will. But usually by, the fourth quarter, you're starting to see the more dominant team take over in that way. So, yeah, I think that there's some similarities there for the next Commanders-Lions game and what we saw with Denver and Buffalo.
And, dude, the AFC. Okay, I like the Chiefs-Texans matchup. That's fine. The Texans defense put the clamps down on the LA Chargers, and if they can play like that against Kansas City, I think we'll at least get a good game. I'd be surprised if the Texans won that game, but I do think the point spread is an indication that Vegas actually thinks that this is going to be a somewhat close game because Kansas City, Houston, when that matchup was set, I was thinking 9.5, 10. It's at 7.5 right now. Looks like some early money's probably coming in on Houston, but the Bills and the Ravens, I think the winner of that one wins the Super Bowl. I'm pretty confident in saying that. And I put a futures bet on the Baltimore Ravens to win the AFC at the start of the playoffs. We had talked about that. And if they're able to win this game, the confidence that will give to Lamar Jackson, who has not been the greatest playoff performer, I think will be enough of a boost to push them past most likely the Kansas City Chiefs. If it's Houston, forget about it. But if it's the Kansas City Chiefs, you kind of have to start getting monkeys off your back, and that would be a great place to start. I don't think this Ravens team can be stopped right now. Lamar just looks like he's in his zone. Derrick Henry is a monster, and that defense has been really good since Thanksgiving. I think they're the best team in the NFL right now.
Yeah, again, I get it. I think, roster top to bottom, there's an argument to be made there. I'll stick to what I've said the entire time, which is I'm going to bet Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in every way that I can until the wheels fall off that wagon. That includes their matchup against Houston. Shout out to the Texans, and you actually swayed me from betting the Chargers. I kept the Texans on all my parlays and money lines with the points. I didn't take them outright in anything, but didn't matter. So yeah, you were right on that one. Stout defense, played really well. And CJ Stroud with Nico Collins, was more than enough to get through LA's defense. I'm not saying I don't give them a chance against. Yeah, I am. I don't give Houston a chance against Kansas
You don't
City.
give them any shot. If that defense shows up, they have. I think they have at least a remote chance.
Keep it within a touchdown. Sure. I don't know if there's ever a time in that game where I'll be like, oh, Houston might win this. I'm blind again. I got burned in the first half of Brady's career betting against him. I profited in the second half, and I was like, okay, Mahomes is that new guy. I'm going to follow this trend. And listen, it won't be the last year I'm betting on Mahomes and the Chiefs in the postseason. So even if I go broke this season, I'm still already in the plus from the last few years, and I'll probably be in the plus again after the next few years.
I don't know how you could confidently take the Chiefs minus 7.5. I have a problem with the number.
6.5. I would 6.5.
I think if you think the Texans have a chance to at least show up to Arrowhead, betting the Chiefs live and waiting. Hopefully the Texans score first. If that happens, hop all over it. Wait till the second half. There's going to be an opportunity. I'm with you. I've learned my lesson. Last year was I could not say it loud enough and to enough people that I will never bet against Patrick Mahomes again. I had the Eagles in the Super Bowl where they played against one another. Jalen Hurts played one of the best games I've ever seen from a quarterback. Mahomes was on one leg and still won the game. That was the lesson learned. That was the biggest bet I've ever made in my life, was on the Eagles, and I lost because of Mahomes. So lesson learned. And I was able to recoup some of that during last year's postseason. So I am with you, but we still have to isolate these games for what they are and not get too caught up in the legend of things, as hard as that might be. So you don't have to bet against Mahomes, but it doesn't mean that you have to be on Mahomes all the time. So there's a difference.
Tell that to the New England fans who watched Brady for 20 years and how not to get caught up in the legend.
Obviously, for me. if you just blind took Brady, but okay, it's not like he was bulletproof. The guy went like 10 years without a Super Bowl.
Yeah, but again, we're talking about betting these guys every round in the postseason through the entirety of the career. Like, you're going to make out okay. And again, maybe this isn't the year that happens. Going back to back is insanely unheard of. But the Chiefs are the type of squad that I think the rest actually helps them. I heard Chris Sims on national TV talking about how he hates that for them. I disagree. You got some guys like Travis Kelce who are older and looked washed this year. If you remember, he looked like that last year, and then he was one of the best players in the playoffs. Yeah. So
I think he'll turn it on. He'll be fine.
I agreed. And they're starting to get healthy. They didn't have Hollywood Brown, right? Pacheco missed a bunch of time. Like, you have a lot more weapons for Mahomes. The defense is still very stout, very good. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a blowout. I'll tease it down to 6.5 because I appreciate and respect what Houston showed in the first round. But I'm taking the Chiefs there, and I'm taking them in the winner of the Bills-Ravens game. I'm buying Buffalo a little bit more right now, but I'm terrified of taking either of those teams, let alone I wouldn't touch either of them with points in terms of giving up. But if you're giving me the team that, if I can get Buffalo with a field goal or the Ravens with a field goal, like, I'm going to probably take that.
Yeah. You can buy. One of the first bets that I made two so far, under 42.5, and Chiefs Texans is one of them. I think both defenses are the stars of the show here. And then the Ravens, you can buy up to plus 2.5 at minus 125. And I feel like that's the way to do it. I'm willing to give up a couple of pennies in order to get that 2.5 because you can see this game being decided by 2 points with how good these two teams are.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. And we'll kind of save next week for next week, but you can pretty much lock me in taking the Chiefs to beat money line as an underdog, whoever comes out of that.
And that'll be a good one because that'll be a tight spread. Whoever they end up facing in the next round. I think that I would save your money if I can convince you one more time to not bet against Houston, just once. Just save your money for next week, and then I cannot argue with you about taking Patrick Mahomes as a short favorite against either one of these teams.
Well, we'll get to that when we get to that, but definitely gear up and enjoy whatever's left in the AFC. It should be a good run. Some of these squads obviously bounced, and on the other side, we still have one game to go before we see who the Eagles will face in Philadelphia. The Eagles who dominated the Packers. I think you and I were both on that. We liked Philly to cover,
Yep.
not necessarily as much of a blowout as we expected in Bills Broncos, but still thought Philly was going to kind of handle the Green Bay team that they did. Green Bay just never lived up to the expectations that they had this year. At different points, they kind of looked like it, but Jordan Love, I mean, just wasn't as good this year, to be blunt, and didn't turn on play. We remember I was talking to you about how last year he played better in the postseason.
Yeah, he was awesome against Dallas.
He did not flip a switch this year. He threw those picks. He looked like the same guy he had all season. And now the Eagles will await the winner of tonight's action, which I want to hear your thoughts on that. If you've changed, you and I were both kind of like, man, I don't really know if we're going to touch that game. I've started to kind of buy into the Minnesota Vikings again in this game for some reason, which will be in Arizona, by the way. Unfortunately, those fires in LA and in California, which are devastatingly awful, taking people's lives and homes. It's just atrocious. And some of the backstory behind why they're not getting better support is even worse. But that game going to be played in Arizona tonight.
I think I'm just going to sit with my teased number and my minimal payout, and I think that's what I'm going to do. We'll see what happens when I get to kickoff, but I was starting to feel pretty confident in taking the Rams, and I wanted to see where the number settled. If this was plus 2.5 in LA and we didn't have this atrocity going on the West Coast, I would definitely be on the Rams. I have a really hard time projecting and predicting what kind of impact this has on the team that I wanted to bet on. I could make the case to myself that this is some big motivator and they're playing for something that's bigger than them and all of that. But then there's also the reality and the human side, which is you've got a lot of things on a personal level that you're worried about being displaced and probably not practicing at the same regimen that you typically would. That has a negative impact on you no matter how motivated you are to go out there and play for somebody. Look at the Chargers. They play in LA too. That was of no effect to them at all. So I don't know which lever to pull down when it comes to motivation or distraction with the Rams, and they're not in their building. They don't have the greatest home field advantage, but it is a home field advantage. This place is going to be dead. There's going to be no one at this game. It's going to be like one of those COVID games years ago. I have a tough time with it. I think matchup-wise, the Rams match up great against Minnesota. If I had to take a side, I would take Rams plus 2.5. I'm going to sit with my Rams plus 8.5, which I got on the Bucks teaser, and I might end up on some Nakua or Cooper Kupp prop and to just sit and watch the action.
Sprinkle it on top there. Yeah, it should be good. So we'll get the final matchup there. Question real quick before we flip it over to the college game for a second. Do you like either of those teams to have a better shot against the Eagles, if at all? Or are you just like Philly's going to steamroll whoever comes out of the matchup?
I don't think Philly steamrolls either one of these teams. I think both of them are good enough in the pass game where they can mount a comeback if they fall behind early, or you could see them with a good game plan going in. Kevin O'Connell for the Vikings, McVay with the Rams going in and jumping on Philadelphia early. I think if I look at the round 2 games and I'm predicting which scores have the lowest differential, it would be Ravens, Bills 1, and then Eagles and whoever they play number 2. I think that one will be tight, and you're probably looking at Eagles. It's probably going to be a similar number. I would say Eagles minus 4.5 against whichever team comes out on top.
I'll co-sign all of that. Very much on the same page with tonight and then whatever happens next. A big matchup coming up in the college game. We have the national championship set. We didn't talk any playoff on that level the last time we spoke here on the Zoneheads podcast, Brandon, but we now know it's going to be Notre Dame and Ohio State. And I, for one, just want to say I've loved this playoff. I understand the critics. I think it could use some tweaking. It's not a perfect system. It's year one. But overall, been a big fan. Love seeing all the different teams in it. And cannot be more on Ohio State to cover everything against Notre Dame in the championship. But I hope it is a close game. I hope it's a fun one. And I think both teams are very deserving. And I think that they are the two best teams in the country right now.
You know, I'll ease up on my stance a little bit about how awful the expanded playoff is. I don't want to be overly redundant with it. I've made my case. I still kind of feel that way, but has the playoff crescendoed nicely? Yeah. You got round 2 at the time when we're most locked into college football, which is right around New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and some decent games. Arizona State, Texas being the best among them. And then Thursday, Friday, great scheduling by college football. Seriously. Loved that.
Agreed.
Because you weren't going head-to-head with the NFL. I hate the idea of these all being on at the same time, but Thursday, Friday, and then letting Saturday, Sunday, Monday be the NFL's days, that was great. It was a great appetizer. Hell, they were even Notre Dame, Penn State was a meal in and of itself. I love that. I think Notre Dame is an interesting story. They're good enough defensively. Riley Leonard is enough of a gamer, and Marcus Freeman just has this sort of magic pixie dust that he's got on this program right now. I would not write them off completely. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and take Notre Dame to win the game. I think this Ohio State team, slightly overrated. Texas was on the doorstep of potentially taking a lead. They were on the 1-yard line. They would have tied the game with an extra point. They would have taken a lead with a 2-point conversion, and they made some of the dumbest coaching errors and player errors that you could possibly make. Quinn Ewers was ripe for a turnover. He did that, but the play prior may have been even more egregious. You're on the 1-yard line, and you pitch it backwards? I mean, talk about just saying, hey, we fear you to death, Ohio State. You handed them the victory with your play calling, and they deserve to lose. But that game was a lot closer than 28-14.
Yeah, I don't know what the over-under is, but I'm going to be on the under for this as well because I think the two defenses are going to have their day. I think we'll get some highlight plays, but I don't expect – even though I like Ohio State pretty heavy-handedly, I don't expect them to, put up 30+, and I don't expect Notre Dame to put up 30+. So
what is the total on that?
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, I think you have really strong defenses on both sides. I think both teams are probably going to turn the ball over a few times.
45.5.
Yeah,
it
so
feels
that's
like
a
the
lower
under would
over,
probably be the right
but I'll
move
probably
there.
still go with the under there. Yeah. Well, good for them and excited again for college football. We're getting closer to the end of the football season overall. It's been a fun run. And, a lot of people, as the pigskins are put away, start to turn their attention fully to the other sports, one of which is the NBA. And I know a lot of people in Orlando had some things to celebrate this week, Brandon Kravitz.
Yes, we wanted to wrap with a tip of the cap to the production staff of the Orlando Magic and to their star in Paolo Banchero. I don't know if you have watched the video that has come out since the player introduction for Paolo Banchero on Friday night. Incredible stuff. I knew going into that player introduction, sometimes I'm out getting a cup of coffee before the game starts because I've just wrapped up the pregame. Sometimes I haven't snatched a meal yet, and I'll go down and I'll actually miss tip-off. No. Not this time. I knew I was going to be parked in my seat for that player introduction. Paul Porter, who I know you guys know well,
yes, sir.
On the Tampa
One of the
side.
best.
He was back in the building. Didn't work the game prior because the Lightning were playing, and he lit that place up. And then when Paolo gets announced, they stop the music and they play the Undertaker's gong. When I tell you chills up and down my body, that was one of the most incredible sports moments I've ever been a part of. Phenomenal production. The place went crazy. And then he drops 34 on a minutes restriction. The guy is phenomenal. The difference between having a star in the NBA and not is like the difference between living paycheck to paycheck and actually having money in your bank account. You're just sort of like just barely getting by when you don't have someone like this, and you've got just all this wiggle room and safety, and you can go down by 8 points and it's not the end of the game. And they wound up losing that one, but then the very next game, which was not as highly regarded because of he was already back, but goes up against Philadelphia. No Joel Embiid. Last 2 minutes of the game, they put him back in. He was up against that restriction, and boom, he won the game for the Orlando Magic. So I'm elated right now. Magic fans have every reason to be, and you're right, Zach. We are celebratory. That is a wrap for this week's edition of the Zone Heads podcast. Please subscribe to this channel. You can find us on YouTube, wherever you download your favorite podcasts as well. We're back at it next week with another episode live on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm Brandon. He's Zach. We'll chat soon, Zone Heads.